You are listening to the Tricorder Transmissions
WeeklyTrek,
episode 32.
Welcome to Weekly Trek, your roundup of everything Star Trek that happened this week. Transportation of major updates, replication of new merch, Section 31 caliber fan speculation, whether you were being featured on a briefing with Neelix, or if your DNA was altered, causing you to transform into your 12-year-old self, and you missed out on the Trek news this week, Weekly Trek is here to catch you up. My name is Allie Martinez, and I'm better known as the 23-year-old Trekkie, and here with me today is my ever-valiant co-host, Shashank Avvaru, who is absolutely incredible on Politics. If you haven't listened to it yet, you need to, and he's an all-around awesome human being. So how are you today, Shashank?
Those are too many compliments for me. I do like the ever valiant one though. That's I feel like if I die and I get to choose what's on my tombstone, will be ever valiant. That sounds great. But just before we get into the news, for people interested, you can follow this show on weekly_trek on Twitter. You can find us on WeeklyTrek on Facebook and other social medias. We are on the Tricorder Transmissions Network. We're proud to be a part of that incredible network. The website link, I believe, is the tricordertransmissions.com/weeklytrek. And if you are interested in supporting us beyond following us in all these places and would like to donate some dilithium Nactigino, please consider donating to our Patreon on the website, patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. Anyway, Ali, what are we discussing on Weekly Trek this week?
We have a lot of exciting things that we're talking about this week. In merchandise news, Fleet Command releases and Star Trek Into Darkness figures are announced. Star Trek II director shares his thoughts on Into Darkness. Star Trek-inspired plane takes flight. A real-life tricorder might be closer than ever. Michael Dorn thinks now is the time for a Worf spinoff. Discovery Season 2 commercial gives us more Spock. And the new Brightest Star trailer presents a first look at Saru's homeworld. So let's delve into the Star Trek news from this week. In Star Trek gaming news, Star Trek Fleet Command is now available for Android and iOS. And in one of the most exciting mobile game announcements of the year for fans, Star Trek Fleet Command is a strategy and role-playing game that brings our favorite characters and ships to life. So Entertainment Weekly has shed some light on Star Trek Fleet Command, and they also discussed it with one of the game's writers, Mike Johnson. And Johnson actually has something really interesting to say about it, and I'll quote him here. So, quote, "It starts just before Star Trek Beyond. Our story will encompass the events of Beyond, and then we'll go beyond, end quote." So I thought that was really funny. But Shashank, I pre-registered myself for the game on the Google Play Store on my Android phone, and then I did end up downloading it when it was released, but I actually have not played it yet. I honestly want to get into it when the holiday season settles down and I can kind of devote more time to playing it more consistently and figuring out all those little idiosyncrasies, because each mobile game kind of has that. And I'm not really much of a mobile gamer. I'm more of a console person, but regardless, I liked the trailer for the game and I will give it a try. But what are your thoughts? Did you download it? Have you played it yet? Have you heard anything about it?
When it comes to video games, I think I am the oldest 26-year-old on the planet. When it was PlayStation 2, that was my jam. And once it went to PlayStation 3, I was like, this is way too complicated for me. I'm going to step out and go back to playing Jumanji, the board game. So I am officially off mobile app, PC, any kind of gaming as far as that goes. But I'm really intrigued because one of the writers of this game is Mike Johnson, who of course is very well known for being, and I'm just quoting STLV people, Star Trek's most prolific comic book writer. He's the guy who wrote all the Discovery stuff from Succession to Light of Kalis, and he really started the renaissance of Star Trek comics with the Star Trek Countdown, which came out just before the Kelvin Trek came out. So yeah, really good writer. I'm really also confused is the wrong word. I am interested in both the positive and the negative connotations of this Entertainment Weekly article, because I was going through the screenshots and they all look incredible. It's great to know that he says beyond, and I don't know what that implies for the movies that we might or might not get. But in these screenshots, there is a character profile of Nero, who, of course, we are led to believe is dead. So I don't know how they're bringing back characters that are dead, but if anybody can do it, it's Star Trek. So just a lot of interesting stuff. I'm this close to downloading and jumping on that game. If nothing has pushed me over, it's these incredible likenesses and the fact that Mike Johnson is one of the people behind it.
Absolutely. I think I've heard like a few small things about it, and I mean, both good and bad. But when you think about it, I mean, you get to build an ideal crew of who you'd like to be on your starship, and you get to see your ship. The graphics are really well done for a mobile game. So when I do get around to it, I think it'll be a really enjoyable game.
Now, the next part of that news is something I can talk about. That's right up my wheelhouse. That's something I can articulate about. That is something that is my joint. I'm done making action figure puns. But this is very, very exciting. And when I say they, I mean comicbook.com recently announced we will be getting at least two, for now, more figures from the Star Trek Select line. Star Trek Select, for those of you who do not know, is very well known for making hyper detailed action figures with extensive dioramas. One of my favorites is the original series Kirk, which depicts the space seed scene in which Kirk is beating down Khan. But just lots of good stuff has come out from Diamond Select. When it comes to Star Trek, they also make really good shapes. They're well known to have made some good props. But these figures are the Into Darkness line Captain Kirk and Spock. And I have lots of thoughts about these, but I'll let you jump in here. What do you think of these? I know you, correct me if I'm wrong, but you also collect or are interested in action figures, right?
Yes, I don't have that extensive of collection, but that will change over the coming years, I'm sure. But I actually think they look pretty good, and they're not too expensive. I believe the article said they were going to be $24.99 or somewhere around that price. And I think for that, I mean, for that price, they look really well done. And they also come with like a variety of accessories and I think even a transporter pad. Am I right there or am I off on a tangent?
No, that you're right. That's transporter pad. And speaking of accessories, Kirk, for example, Kirk comes in his command gold with two tricorders and just a bunch of accessories from phaser rifles to alternate hands to that transporter pad. I'm a little not disappointed. I'm a little sad that they didn't give us an extensive diorama. If people are interested, they can go Google something like Diamond Select a TOS Kirk or Diamond Select TOS Spock, which came with the name is escaping me now, but the Corbomite maneuver alien. So that was the diorama that we got. So it's sad that all they gave us was just a transporter pad for these guys. But I'm not going to complain because Star Trek Into Darkness is my favorite movie, and I'm glad that finally getting the recognition it deserves. So I'm very excited. Few thoughts about the figures, but they're minor complaints that I have. I do appreciate details. Like for Mr. Spock, one of the alternate hands is a Vulcan pose hand, so I can just put up my Zachary Quinter Spock on the transporter pod with Vulcan hands, and that would negate the need of all the rifles that he's coming with. So all in all, great figures. I'm excited for them. Hopefully they'll give us Khan at some point, because that would be a really cool figure to have, especially with all the accessories and possibly an alternate costume. That would be nice. Here's hoping. Speaking of, did you have any more thoughts on this, Ali, before we got out of here?
With the action figure game, because I'm kind of just getting into it, I think, though, no matter what action figure they are, it is exciting, or I mean, whatever merchandise it is exciting to see that stuff in the stores. I just, you'll go to Target or you'll go to any store and you'll walk in the aisle, and I just seeing Star Trek toys puts this huge grin on my face. So, I mean, speaking also of Star Trek Into Darkness, our next article from comicbook.com, Nicholas Meyer, who's the director of Wrath of Khan, gives his thoughts on 2013 Star Trek Into Darkness. And I hope I'm not spoiling this for anyone, because it's been a while since Into Darkness came out, but it's, I guess, essentially a quote-unquote retelling in a way of Wrath of Khan, but with a much different flavor. And obviously it takes place in the Kelvin timeline, so things that are considerably different do happen. But Nicholas Meyer says that he kind of feels two different ways about it in this interview. And he explains this by saying he appreciates the note towards his work in Wrath of Khan, but did not really enjoy Into Darkness. He said that he thought that it needed more depth. And I, just like you, Shashank, I actually really liked Into Darkness as a film. But I mean, I do see certain perspectives that might not be so inclined towards it. But since Into Darkness is your favorite film, what did you think of what Nicholas Meyer said about it?
As soon as I saw this article, the first thing I wanted to do was just say, you can't say that, Nicholas Meyer. But I got over it pretty quickly. Nicholas Meyer is a great director. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, for a lot of people, is their favorite Star Trek movie, and that's okay. I have nothing against that. People have their favorites. It's a very well-told story and a great continuation of that Kirk-Khan rivalry. But I think with this comment he makes, wherein I'm just quoting some of the things that he said, in my sort of artistic worldview, if you're going to do an homage, you have to add something. And him saying something like, this is just one person's opinion, mine, but I found it more clever than satisfying. I think he's way off base here. First off, Into Darkness does not portray Khan as a xenophobic leader bent on revenge. It shows him as a Frankenstein's monster that is created by Marcus, who's fighting his programming and just trying to get his crew out of the big problem that they're facing. Granted, he's not a character that makes the wisest decisions. He kills people. He's a terrorist, and we start our interaction with him when really he does that big explosion that kills a lot of people. But unlike The Wrath of Khan, where he's quoting Shakespeare the whole time, and the character is, there is a different take of the character. In here, you kind of can find places where you can be sympathetic about it, and you also see that you also see Spock from this really analytical, logical character fall down into emotional, I'm going to punch this alien human side. And I really think the line that is said in, ironically, the movie directed by Nicholas Meyer, the line said, the line that comes out of the consequences of that movie, in which and Kirk says, of all the people I've encountered, this Spock is the most human. You actually get to see that most human side told in Into Darkness, because you see him go from, in the start of the movie, Kirk and Dr. McCoy are talking about what to do, and Kirk asks, what would Spock do? And McCoy says he would let you die. You go from that to, at the end of the movie, the character just going into this rabid animalistic anger, trying to avenge his friend. So that most human thing comes across to me, and that loop completes to me. And it seems like not only a beautiful homage, but in a way, what was said in The Wrath of Khan is actually shown in Into Darkness, which is a great way of showing, not telling in screenwriting, as they say. So as you can tell, I have a lot of thoughts about Into Darkness, but I like, long story short, I think he's wrong. But again, this is one person's opinion, mine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. And I know that there were a lot of people that did not enjoy Into Darkness, but on the other hand, there were a lot of people that did and had that same feeling that you did. So you're not alone, because I like it too.
Speaking of being not alone, it looks like the scientists at MIT are at it again to make sure that we're getting closer and closer to building an aircraft that really tell us if we will be or will not be alone. According to India Today, which is a popular newspaper back home, and comicbook.com got a hold of this, all the aircrafts in Star Trek have inspired a group of scientists at MIT to build the first ever plane with no moving parts, with the idea of creating a quieter, simpler aircraft with no combustion emissions. Now, just a little bit of technical info here for those of you interested. One of the trademarks of a lot of spacecraft within Star Trek is that they, like you mentioned here, do not have a whole lot of moving parts. Instead of parts within themselves moving, there is energy generated. And in Star Trek, it's usually the dilithium crystals that allow the ships to move forward. So if you were to imagine, a flight taking off, instead of the wings moving for a flight, which would be more of an early Wright brothers design, where you'd have to actually get the wings to move. Or if we would talk about spaceships, if for somebody interested, there is a space ship type called Solar Sail, which is actually featured in one of the DS9 episodes. The name escapes me, which Cisco and Jake, they both get together and build this old style aircraft that actually moves thanks to the wind, and that's called a solar sail. Now compare that with something like the Enterprise, which is basically has no moving parts, but it has energy that allows it to move forward. That is what they're trying to do. They're trying to go away from our traditional spaceflight design to trying to create something that does not need moving parts. So with that in mind, they've developed what is called a version 2 EAD airframe, and it's a 4.4 pounds flight with a wingspan about 16.4 feet. And they really don't even imagine there would be a whole lot of practical purposes at this point. They're merely testing the waters, or in this case, they're testing the skies to see if something like this could be possible. But their other really big goal that I appreciate is that they don't want to depend on fossil fuels to fly, which I think is where the future is going. So just a really good innovation that and another great thing to come out of Star Trek. But what did you think about this, Ali?
I am honestly really glad that you introduced that Trek news section, because as an engineer, you explained it very well, and I would have sounded completely ridiculous. Honestly, coming at it from a perspective where, I mean, math and science are not my thing, but still, it's just amazing to think about what an ingenuity it is. And also how cool that these MIT scientists were kind of inspired by Star Trek. I always love hearing like the real life Trek application, because when you think about Trek back then, everyone thought that stuff was crazy. They thought that stuff would never exist. And here we are today, where we're talking about things like this plane and the holodeck and all this other stuff. It just makes me happy. And I guess I can't be any more technical about it than that. But I guess in the article, they talked about how it's powered by, I think they called it ionic wind or something like that. And I guess I was just going to ask if you had any idea about how that worked, because I guess it has something to do with ions and they create thrust, but I'm no scientist. It's just very interesting to me.
Well, I'll do my best to explain it succinctly. Ionic energy, the physics definition is the minimum amount of energy that you need to move an electron, the most loosely bound electron. And if you were to put that in real world practical terms, it's essentially trying to do something like what dilithium crystals do. Or imagine the Enterprise, and Kirk is on command, and he has said punch it. and you see the ship go from not moving at all to essentially have this burst of energy that causes it to warp to deep space, right? That's kind of an exaggerated version of ionization or ion energy, which is you're trying to move something that is not really bound to anything, but it is also not really moving. And that's the energy that they're trying to use. So by tapping into something within the wind, I believe they're trying to create this ionized energy, which allows the ions within the wind to help propel that ship. I'm sorry, I might have gone too nerdy on that one, but yeah, it's essentially trying to move something by using ions within the air, as opposed to using something like gasoline to try to charge that through air.
Oh, well, don't be sorry for getting nerdy. Thank you for explaining it because I had no idea. But I'll transition into some more real life Star Trek news, which I always love to hear. A recent ZDNet article has inferred that we may also see the tricorder, or I guess more accurately, the medical tricorder, sooner rather than later. And it mentions the fact that, I mean, obviously the tricorder has always been very fascinating to us, and it really is kind of a perennial favorite Trek tech. But also, when you think about it, the idea of a tricorder is like so practical in the modern day world. And the article goes into, I mean, really intricate detail on the ventures being used, I mean, to build tricorder like technology, and not just now, but in the past, stuff that they've based how they want to build the tricorder. And really, the focus is having one medical device that can diagnose a variety of conditions. That's kind of what they're calling it. But like I said, Shashank's the resident science expert. But I was really interested by something they mentioned in the article, which was that Qualcomm sponsored this thing called the Tricorder X Prize. And it was essentially a contest that promotes the creation of new medical devices. So a company called Basal Leaf Technology won recently, and they created a device called, I mean, I guess the way it's spelled here, you'd say Dexter or DXTER, which this device could sense heart and lung sounds, heart rates, and heart rate rhythm monitor, and could also analyze blood and determine the white cell count and a bunch of other stuff, which is completely mind-blowing. But I really had never heard of that before. And just to know that that's actually on the forefront now is totally mind-blowing. And I mean, as you are an engineer, Shashank, do you think that the tricorder is a feasible technology that we could see very soon?
I think people should go out and seek this article because it does cover the big bullet points of history that happened while people tried to create the tricorder, especially this Kanadu. For those of you who might remember, I was very excited when that came out. And it started as an Indiegogo project and it ended up not being approved by the FDA, but it did pick up and it made a good amount of progress. And I applaud anybody who's trying to do something like this. But Ali, the biggest challenge with something like this is we're all familiar with MRI scanners, right? You go somewhere, you lay down, and there's a big machine, essentially a big hole that you're pushed into, and using a combination of sounds and lights and vibrations, it detects what is going on with your body. The challenge with the tricorder is to change the big room, bring that entire room onto a device that could be held on your hand, eliminate all of the sound and most of the light. So the challenge is taking that macro and bringing it down to a microscopic level. Yeah, you would all, if people will excuse me jumping franchises for a second, it's like taking an entire building in Ant-Man and turning it down to a little suitcase. That's the challenge, and that's always been the challenge, is bringing that technology that we've so used to being at that size down to something like this. And another important thing is trying to avoid touch, which is the hallmark of the tricorder, is that without having to touch a person, because when somebody is bleeding out or somebody is dealing with a wound that does not allow somebody to touch them, that's really where something like the tricorder would shine. So I think eventually we'll get there. It's like the cell phone. Before the cell phone came out, a lot of it started as uh, like Alexander Graham Bell's thread tied cell phone that went through ground wire. It started there, and then we got the cell phone. So I think these are all the steps that we are looking at, and this is history happening before our eyes as people go from failing to eventually get into a point where something like this Tricorder X Prize challengers or something like another thing that's mentioned here, which is the QBox launch date and what they're trying to do there. Eventually, one of these will succeed, but these are just the building blocks of something like this.
Well, I mean, it would certainly speed things up at the doctor's office, don't you think?
Or you wouldn't have to go to a doctor's office, and with a really nice AI in your house that hopefully, God willing, we'll all have Mahel Baret's voice in there telling us what to do with the tricorder. We don't have to go to the doctor anymore, and we don't have to worry about all those doom-filled healthcare bills. But moving on to a little bit of happy news, or I guess just news in general. This is not really new news because this has been happening for a while, but we're reporting this from screenrant.com, and Michael Dawn is out there again at it saying it's time for his war spin-off to happen, and he thinks now is the perfect time. In the article, he goes back to talking about his ideas for another spin-off that brings back that character, and he's using the argument essentially that with all of the new Trek being announced, it only makes sense that this story come alive too. I'm quoting him now. He says, "This is, I think, perfectly timed and placed. Not stepping on anybody's toes. And I always thought the Klingon Empire was a great empire to write about because it's Shakespearean." There are a bunch of problems with what he's trying to do, and I hope I'm not offending anyone when I quote Spock, "The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few." I hope he realizes that at some point. But lots of thoughts on this one. What do you think, Ali?
Well, I kind of resonate with the same place that you are, and where I come from on this. It's not necessarily that I think it's a good or a bad thing, but I think it's just interesting now that in Discovery we're kind of seeing a different side of the Klingons with Mary Chieffo and her being the Chancellor, and who knows coming out of that what we will see from the Klingons. And then that, that would obviously affect this potential Worf spinoff, or at least cause people to have certain opinions about it. I don't know. Like I said, I try to keep an open mind about new Star Trek shows, but I mean, nothing's been officially announced. It's not necessarily like CBS has green-lighted it or anything like that. I don't know. I guess it would depend on the writing team and really what they settled on in the end for what would be a decent like story progression. But in my mind, I don't want to step on anyone's toes here. I personally think that Worf's story has essentially been told through TNG and also through DS9. It'd be cool to see him cameo, maybe in the Picard show. But actually, interesting enough, in this interview that he did, it was actually the original interview was with Inverse. He did mention that he would be interested in appearing on the Picard show, but on the contingency that if it wasn't just a cameo appearance, he wanted to have an actual role. So I don't know. There's a lot of potential things that could happen with that. Do you think that he would be decent in the Picard show? Do you think it would be good for him to be in the Picard show? Or do you think that his story has made its mark and maybe we should focus more on new Klingons like Mary Chieffo? I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Firstly, I think it's really ironic that the actor who has been in the most Star Trek anything, he's on record for having been in Most of the movies, TV shows combined, he has the most episodes, and he has the biggest arc, arguably as a character. It's someone who has had the most screen presence is now yearning for some more screen presence. I don't think that's greed. I just think it's ambition. What I have always vouched for is a possible comic book series that he could write, because
Ah.
uh, it's a way cheaper. Comic books are on the rise again, and Trek Comics have had a really good recent history of doing well. So I've always thought he has so many ideas. He should find an IDW should just find him an artist, and they should just let them continue Worf's story the way he wants it. Uh, it's in contrast directly with what he said a little while ago. For regular listeners, they'll know that we reported on a previous article in which he talked about he was one of the celebrities that was on the stage along with the TNG panel at a convention, and he said, I could not do what they're doing with the makeup with the Klingons. It's really difficult. It's near impossible. This is very daunting. So on the one hand, he says that, and on the other hand, he's talking about how he wants to show about people in makeup. I don't exactly know where his headspace is and how much he can commit to given his age. If he is going to be on the Picard show, he might as well be there at this point. But here's my contingency if he's going to be on the Picard show. I have seen so much of Worf now. I hate to say it, but I would like to see the death of Worf. I want to see what this warrior. We got to see the birth of the warrior. We got to see the way of the warrior. I want to see the death of the warrior. And if he's going to be on the Picard show, show me that part, because that is the only thing that is left. It's like the old man Logan version of Worf. You have seen so much of Worf now. That is really the only story that's left really interesting to me about that character. I hope I'm not way off, Ali.
I don't think so. And I'm not saying, and I don't have anything against Michael Dorn. I love Worf as a character. I just very much align with you in what you're saying. But in other news, Star Trek news, which is super exciting that I get to say that so much on Weekly Trek, in Star Trek Discovery news, we saw a new trailer for season 2 drop this following week. And there were a ton of little awesome morsels in there that make me wish it was already January 17th. I guess, to be fair, the holiday season is my favorite time of year, but whatever, I digress. So TrekCore published an article regarding the trailer, and we saw some pretty exciting things. We saw Spock smiling, per se, and we do get to see more of Anson Mount's Captain Pike. We get to see more footage of the rescue of the survivors from the USS Hiawatha. We get to see them navigating the asteroid field. We get to see Spock and Pike together. Just all these great things. What did you think of the trailer? And can you contain your excitement for season 2 of Discovery? Because I certainly cannot.
I cannot, but every time I get too excited, I just sit down and watch one of the short treks, and it's like, okay, they're doing this, they're making an effort, they're trying to keep you calm. Just hold on. But it's weird that the year has passed away so quickly in some ways that we're just a little over a month away, and before you know it, season 2 will be here. But the article really also mentions some of the more interesting tidbits to me, like the USS Hiawatha or Hiawatha. And firstly, I appreciate that name. For those of you who might not know, Hiawatha is the name of an Indian leader, and it's one of those uh, just that they're tapping into these deep annals of history from one of the ships previously was named Emmett Till, which is a civil rights homage, and now they're homaging the Native Americans. So just a lot of interesting stuff. But I really enjoyed seeing Spock smile. That was a really nice touch, and it's just they're doing their best. This is none of us ever thought we'd be here. That if somebody were to sit down even after Beyond came out and said, hey, in the next 2 years, not only is Star Trek going to have a renaissance, Spock is going to be back, and you're going to love everything that will happen on this new show that takes characters from 10 years before the original series if anybody had said any of those words, I would have said, you need to go away. You are a crazy person. So none of this is supposed to happen. So I'm just really here to enjoy the ride at this point.
I definitely agree. I am in the same boat as you. I mean, everyone thought if they were going to do another Star Trek series that it would have been post Nemesis. Instead, they come up with they come at us with this, and it's amazing and awesome, but totally unexpected. And even at the end of season 1, when we saw the Enterprise appear, that was like totally crazy. I had no idea. Didn't even see it coming. Not for a mile. I'll tell you that.
Speaking of people not being where they're supposed to be, or vice versa, we have another short trek coming our way. The Brightest Star, we got a new trailer, and EW had some exclusive words and photos, which are part of the trailer too. But here's the synopsis. I think we finally have a full synopsis. In The Brightest Star, Saru lived a simple life on his home planet of Kaminar with his father and sister. Young Saru, full of ingenuity and a level of curiosity uncommon among his people, yearns to find out what lies beyond his village, leading him on an unexpected path. We also got to see some really cool details about Kaminar, and we got to see some of the other people from the Kelpian race, which was very exciting for me. It's just there is something so beautiful and haunting about this particular short tracks. I'm intrigued about this in a way I'm not intrigued about the other ones, because while the other ones were one of them is a quasi sequel with the first one, the other one's a crazy sequel that takes place 1,000 years in the future. This first one is a prequel that tells us more about this character who enchanted us with one of his first big interactions in the show, where he talks about how his species is they're if they've evolved to learn and sense danger. So a lot of thoughts on this one. Ironically, the world itself kind of reminds me of the first planet that we see in Into Darkness. So just a lot of homages, I think, and connections. A lot of good stuff. What do you think about the trailer, and are you excited for Saru's origin story?
I'm very excited. Not to mention that I'll get to watch it this next week, but I am super fascinated first by the idea of Saru. He was seriously such an endearing character. Immediately wanted to know more about him, where he came from, and just all that exposition. But the one thing I'm most looking forward to is I hope in a way, which I'm sure they will, because we're all waiting for it, they're going to kind of show the transition of how Saru decided to join Starfleet, because he does say that he's the first Kelpian to join Starfleet. And obviously Kelpians, being a race that, you know, is very fearful of a lot of things, it was a big step. So I'm interested to see kind of if we'll kind of get that moment where we see him join Starfleet. I mean, we only get 15 or so minutes, so I won't have all of the exposition that I'm wishing for, but also just to see him come from being on his planet to who he is now. I'm just super excited to see. Even if we get just a little bit of it, that'll be enough for me.
And I think you at some point, even if not in this particular short tracks, I think we will see that, especially given the history around Saru and the love for that character. We will see those pivotal moments, much like we saw with Burnham, and or at least they will be referred to or talked about. So all in all, just all good news, positive stuff. There is another weekly trek in which there was nothing sad or unfortunate that we had to report. So that's always a good thing. And just to enjoy more positivity and good Star Trek stuff, people should follow our wonderful 23-year-old Trekkie. Where can people do that, Ali?
You can find me primarily on Twitter. My handle is at @trekkie. I am at the same handle on Instagram. If you want to check me out on my website, it's trekkie.wordpress.com. You can also reach out through direct message on Twitter or send me an email. My email is the.ttrekkie@gmail.com.
And you can find me on at gutter_heo on Twitter. I'm kind of taking a break from posting a whole lot of Star Trek stuff right now on my Twitter. I simply because one of my favorite movies, it's not even out yet, and I can tell it'll be one of my favorite movies. Aquaman is coming out pretty soon, so I'm doing my best to get into that underwater goodness. I'm abandoning the deep space for the deep waters. So it'll be fun. Join along with me, but usually anything nerdy, I'm up to talk about it. But at @gut_hero, that's about all the social media I do. With that, Ali, we ready to get out of here?
Yeah, sounds good to me. Thanks for talking Trek with me.
And live long and prosper.